Good day, ladies and gentlemen. This is Bob on the house. Mind space occupied by this brutality of the Putin and Russia on the civilians of Ukraine. Nobody would have thought that in this century, in today's day and age, a country would use such brutal force to change the borders. It's unacceptable. No matter which side of the fence you try and sit on, especially if you try and balance the way India is trying to. It should have come out a little bit more forcefully, it seems. Our guys suggested we had come out forcefully, but then what Ashley Tellis writes, it just didn't go down that well. They all understand this. The Australian PM just went by. India continues to be at the center of the space because India seems to have become critical both as far as Russia is concerned and as far as the Indo-Pacific is concerned. So we are in a good spot. We have to have the necessary bandwidth, diplomatic bandwidth, to ensure we are able to ride the tide. Ride the wave, as they would say. So what do we have here? Biden heads to Europe with forward press to Poland amid fear, war turning into a quagmire. Russia tells US envoy ties close to rupture after Biden's war criminal remark for Putin. Then you have Seema Sorohi who hits the nail in the head. Everybody loves a good war. He says the US and other NATO members have sent more 17,000 anti-tank weapons across the Poland and Romania into Ukraine in just the last 10 days. Britain and the US are coordinating arms supply under the bland-sounding International Donors Coordination Center, a name that is unlikely to fool Moscow. The question is how many more javelins and stingers before Putin considers the influx of arms an act of war. The US, which already announced $350 million in new arms shipment when the war started, unveiled a $13.6 billion emergency aid package for Ukraine this week. That's $13 billion to make the arms industry happy and keep the factories running. Zelensky's willingness to negotiate an end to the war just gets lost in the shuffle. And what is this is that what we need to know. Anxiety in US about India's position, but ties will stay strong. This is Ashley Tellis. I can tell you he's a smart guy, smarter than anybody I know in India, right? I don't envy India at all. I think New Delhi's truly found itself between a rock and a hard place. But tough guys are made when they are in between a rock and a hard place. But they are so fearful about the implication of what a deeper Russian-Chinese embrace might mean for Indian security that they are still struggling for ways to avert that. I think they concluded that the only trick within reach was to avoid a public censure of Russia, which is what India did. I believe that PM Modi was actually quite tough in his private conversation with Putin. I think India's abstention in the UN Security Council was probably inevitable, though I wish India would have voted differently on the procedural issue. We were not told this, right? Further, I thought the statement of explanation on India's abstention vote was excessively subtle. Time to get over the subtlety, right? If Putin and his regime survive the war in Ukraine, India's abstention could pay off. But if Putin or Russia falter as a result of his aggression, Delhi's situation will become quite perilous and its abstention may come back to haunt it. Is there an understanding of India's predicament in Washington or is there annoyance? The question is a complex one because you have got to look at specific audiences. Within the executive branch, there is an intellectual understanding of India's predicament, but that does not diminish the emotional disenchantment because of the belief that partnership with India is not simply about interests, it's also about values. On the Hill, the anxieties are much deeper. The disappointment with India is palpable across the aisle, and we better be aware Taranjeet is doing a good job, but hey, even he can't do a miracle. Questions are being asked about what a global strategic partnership between the US and India actually means if India has substantially different positions on the fundamental questions of global order. This is the important point, folks. You can't have freedom of the seas and not be able to respond to this. And I am told, and I'm getting this quite clear, that Indira Gandhi was very strong in her reaction when it came to USSR's invasion of Afghanistan. And of course, in civil society, the consternation and disappointment are even stronger. 3 different layers, okay? My own sense is that US policymakers are hoping that while India has taken a certain position with respect to developments in Europe, it will continue to remain very strongly committed to the partnership in the Indo-Pacific. And that, folks, is the real McCoy that India needs to protect. So India really is the flavor of the month. Everybody seems to be coming here, the Australian, the Japanese PM, the Australian conference, and you have all these India, Canada planned key visits to boost relation, Israel PM to visit India to mark 30 years of formal ties. But the key here to me, for the Indo-Pacific, is to become part of Japan and for the defense relationship that's evolving between Japan and Australia. That is a critical one to know. So when we see here what we have here, message from Melbourne, Beyond China Challenge, Quad crafts a shared vision, that is written by Rajiv Bhatia. He says the success of Quad's vaccine partnership is critical for its credibility, and here India's biological E plays a critical role. Second, people-to-people relationships, which are celebrated as Quad's greatest strengths, will receive a boost given a new exchange program by the US in cyber security, maritime security, countering disinformation, and promoting transparency and governance. Then he says the conclusion is clear. Quad powers are strengthening their habits of cooperation. Right. Then we had what we had here, Narendra Modi and Scott Morrison. India and Australia voiced concern over Ukraine war. India, Australia likely to ink early harvest trade deal by March end. Quad partners have accepted India's Ukraine stance, says envoy, and this is the Quad countries have accepted India's position. We understand that each country has bilateral relations. This is Barry O'Farrell, Australian High Commissioner. That's exactly what Morrison said. Now, but the important part is both the Prime Minister of Japan and the Prime Minister of Australia brought up Ukraine and Russia as co-concerns in their conferences or in their conversation, which is also important messaging, right? In the old days, in these formats, for India sensitivity, nobody would have brought those up, but so India is growing up to that, right? Japan to give 33.2 lakh crores push to economic ties. My God. Modi Kishida call for an end to war in Ukraine, a return to diplomacy. India, Japan call for end to Ukraine war. Friends with benefit indeed. He says Japanese PM's visit reaffirms salience of bilateral ties with India at a time of geopolitical ferment. This is the important part, right? And then hear this. Japan, Australia are forging a new security paradigm in Asia. India should take note. This is what I was talking about. This is written by Shashank Matu. Japan and Australia made their latest gambit on the Asian chessboard this January. After 7 years of painstaking negotiations, PM Scott Morrison and Fumio Kishida signed a landmark defense treaty, the Reciprocal Access Agreement, that is likely to reshape the regional power balance. By laying the groundwork, RAA paves the way for a new era of defense cooperation between Tokyo and Canberra. How many of us know that, right? For India, which is hosting the two PMs this week, RAA is an encouraging sign. All roads to an effective Indian Indo-Pacific policy go through Tokyo. Japan's decision to sign the agreement, only the second of its kind, signals that it looks to shed its pacifist Cold War foreign policy and traditional dependence on the United States. Should New Delhi play its cards right, it could secure an expanded defense partnership with a Japan that is looking for like-minded partners and is one of the few Asian players willing to risk Beijing's ire, as is India, right? With Tokyo and Canberra, New Delhi may seek to expand its defense technology partnerships that will enhance joint military operations and help diversify India's source of military material. India's troubled defense acquisitions process continues to baffle observers, including us. Should India wish to draw closer to its Quad partners, bolstering its understaffed diplomatic corps and ensuring bureaucratic follow-through on high-level political commitments will be the way forward. At the same time, guess who's come calling? India and France announced Blue Economy Roadmap. Jaishankar, French counterpart, discuss Ukraine crisis, AF situation too. And guess what's happening in the Middle East? Syria, Assad visits UAE, first trip to an Arab nation since war. Important changes. No levy on 99% of exports to UAE after FTA inking Commerce Secretary. India and UAE are partners in prosperity. Then you have India showcases organic food and millets at Dubai Expo 2020. India UAE signed free trade pact to double trade in 5 years. And guess who's left out in the cold? Good old Pakistan. Pakistan has to return $3 billion to Saudi in 1 year. No wonder PM Imran Khan is saying that he enjoys India's independent foreign policy. But here he's trying to needle us actually, right? Because he's trying to ensure that we don't jump with the West, because then he's in trouble. But he's in trouble in the Middle East too, right? You can see what's happening there, right? That the new Quad and now with the FTA, and then you have the Syrians there. UAE is getting to play a larger than life role in the Middle East after US's exit with the blessings of the United States. Cheers. So as Ashley Tellis had pointed out, and probably rightly so, one of the few people who said that a lot of India's decisions on Russia are actually keeping in mind the collusion that's developing or the tight bond that is developing between Russia and China. Now, it's obviously clear to the rest of the world that it's going to be very difficult to drive a car or a van through that to break it up. And for India, that's becoming to be a very dangerous situation. So when it's playing this game, it's trying to somehow ensure it gets saved in this upcoming crash. But it looks kind of difficult, right? Because here, and China understands that. What he says is China targets US over Indo-Pacific strategy, calls it dangerous, and they call it, and they've made it a point to make it equivalent to NATO. So hence referring to what's happened in what's happening with Ukraine, right? China LAC issue discussed with Japan's Shringla. China snubs US, says he who tied belt to the tiger must take it off. Beijing okays new rule on supervision of military equipment purchase contracts, but it's having a hairy, scary time in Hong Kong and on the mainland. COVID cases more than double in China's growing outbreak. Is it because Sinopharm was a dud? Who knows? US Admiral, China fully militarized at least 3 islands built in South China Sea. And what does Vijay Gokhale has to write? That's interesting. Bear in our seas. China wants Putin to survive and then use Russia to complicate matters in Indo-Pacific. And this may be the real McCoy. And this is what India is trying to prevent. China is also watching how Western sanctions impact the political situation inside Russia, more specifically the survivability of President Putin's government. Then he says, China's naval activities in the Indian Ocean, including the establishment of military bases, are already ongoing, but there is the great possibility of congruence with Russia in denying the Americans' dominant position west of the Malacca Strait. And that's the idea. Third, the Belt and Road Initiative, which is being restructured for the post-COVID era, is likely to be refocused on the Indo-Pacific, but it's going to have a lot of problem because all of its, firstly, I think China is running out of money, right? China has drawn a direct connection between the Five Eyes, UK, US, Australia, Canada, New Zealand alliance, AUKUS and Quad. Each has been described as an element of American containment strategy. This is an overt attempt to place India with the other side. Going forward, expect a full throttle pushback from China and Russia on the idea of Quad. So India needs to throw its weight. See, look, at the end of the day, I am absolutely not with the guys who think our future lies with independent foreign policy if it puts us together with people like Turkey, Russia, and China. It doesn't. If we want the well-being of India in terms of economy, technology, in terms of security, and if we really think China is our real challenge, then we need the Western world. And anyway, that's the place of choice where everybody goes to. Nobody goes to China or Russia, or very few people do, right? Revisiting Deterrence in Asia is written by C. Raja Mohan. Russia's war in Ukraine has triggered a new conversation that is bound to transform the Asian nuclear landscape. This is the other big thing that's happening, folks. He says, Russian President Vladimir Putin's nuclear saber rattling in Ukraine, which did create political ripples in Europe, has triggered a far more consequential debate on the importance of atomic weapons in deterring Chinese expansionism. For those facing Chinese wrath in Asia, it is not difficult to buy into the proposition that Russia would have thought twice before invading Ukraine if Kiev had nuclear weapons. Same thing happened in here, folks. South Korea, Japan, Australia. In an important statement last week, the former Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe, called for a national debate on hosting American nuclear weapons on Japanese soil. In South Korea, which is electing its president this week, and they did, frontrunner Yoon Suk-yeol has talked of strengthening Seoul's nuclear deterrence against both Pyongyang and Beijing. Taiwan, which is in the crosshairs of President Xi Jinping's regional strategy, is reportedly developing a nuclear-powered submarine that could offer some deterrence against a Chinese invading force. Australia, which is working with the UK and the US to build nuclear-powered submarine, is accelerating the project after the Ukraine invasion. Therein lies the rub, folks. Russia has started a ball game, as like somebody said, folks. Whichever time there is a declining power, it only lets go with a fight and a yahoo, and that's the case of America. But in this particular case, it might be reversed, because I think in this case what's happened, China has missed the bus and it is flailing wildly along with Russia. Oh well, world is a dangerous place at this point of time. You know, don't know where it's going to go. But hey, this is all about India. Let's pick sides. Not for proving an independent foreign policy, but something that actually secures our interests, folks. It's time to think about ourselves, not about anything else. Jai Hind.